Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jane, for that awesome introduction. So I'm really glad that we took a poll so I can have an idea of what audience to target to today. And as Jane mentioned, as I'm going through the slides, you guys can feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask questions. Um, I provided a very small overview of the voucher program with the anticipation that the audience, you guys knew um, pretty much how the voucher program, what the voucher program is and how it operates. And I wanted to leave sufficient time to really get into the nitty gritty of your questions. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get the presentation started. So the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the objective of the program is to provide low-income families with assistance in paying their monthly rent for private units that are in the market. So most of you are already familiar with I want to emphasize the objective of the program because I think that there is a misconception of what the Housing Choice Voucher Program is, that the agencies that administer these programs are looking for affordable housing, or they're looking for units that have affordable rents. And I think that it's really important to emphasize the affordability part of that particular piece of the conversation, because there's a misconception that in the voucher program, a landlord is not able to charge the amount of rent that it would for a unit that is not subsidized by Housing Choice Voucher. And that's just simply not true. The landlord absolutely is encouraged to charge the same amount of rent for a Housing Choice Voucher participant as they would a non-Housing Choice Voucher participant. What gets lost in translation is the affordability piece for the actual participant. Sometimes units are just not affordable for the participant. And I'll talk more about the affordability process as we go further into the presentation. So voucher families, they typically choose to lease homes that are close to their jobs, schools, support from their family, and other amenities that are in the community. And the agency is charged with the responsibility of making sure that the unit that the family leases meets a minimum health and safety standard. And that standard is determined by the rental subsidy that is paid on behalf of the family is paid directly to the landlord. And oftentimes agencies have the ability of making direct deposits to the landlord just to as an additional attraction, or to speed up the process in assuring that our landlords are paid adequately for their units. The family will then pay the difference between the subsidy amount and the rent that the landlord is charging for the unit. And for more information about how to become a Section 8 landlord, the facts about the Section 8 program, you can visit the website as indicated in the spreadsheet here. And I did forget to mention, although the slides are not available now, I can definitely make sure that these slides are available to Jane and Allison at the end of the meeting, so you guys can have access to the slides and the links to the resources. So the agency that administers the Housing Choice Voucher Program, generally that agency is going to determine what area it wants to cover with its Housing Choice Voucher Program. And what I mean by that is there are several Housing Choice Voucher programs that are offered by HUD. And of those programs, there are multiple agencies that can administer those housing choice voucher programs. So with that said, each agency, although we all have to abide by the program rules as they are dictated by HUD, we all may have a different way to administer those rules. So we all may have different policies and procedures for one particular task. However, we all must follow the same regulations.
A couple things in chat real quick, Wanisha.
Yes,
someone's asking if you can speak up a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And then someone's just sharing with us that they spoke to one of their participants that advised me that he was on the street and someone from the PATH team got him in the program. The program participant was very appreciative, and I also felt great to be a part of the system. So just
that is awesome news.
Yeah. All right, back to you.
Those are the stories that we love to hear. Those are definitely the stories that we love to hear. And if I'm not speaking loud enough or clearly, please just let me know. I apologize. So the agencies that administer the program. So as I mentioned, there could be multiple agencies administering multiple different programs, covering different areas or overlapping in the same area. For example, here in Washtenaw County, the Ann Arbor Housing Commission operates a housing choice voucher program. However, MSHDA, Michigan State Development Housing Authority, also operates a housing choice voucher program. So a landlord could be a participant of a housing choice voucher program, but in turn deals with several different agencies for multiple units. So the basics of the program is once the agency determines that the individual or family is eligible for the housing choice voucher, that participant is then issued a voucher. The participant goes out into the private market to find a rental unit. And sometimes those participants, they have caseworkers that will help them to locate an affordable unit. But in general, the program participant is completely responsible and independent to find their own rental unit. The landlord will then screen the participant for approval, and they'll use the same screening guidelines that they'll use for a tenant or applicant who does not have a housing voucher. As a participant of the agency's housing choice voucher program, the landlord is going to be required to fill out some forms that the agency will issue to the participating family. The agency will then use those forms to determine whether or not the unit is affordable for the family and whether the rent is comparable to other similar units in the community. If the unit passes those two tests, then the agency will complete an HQS inspection of it. And upon passing the inspection, the family is then approved to sign a lease. The landlord at that time will collect the security deposit that is due. The agency will then sign the HAP contract with the landlord. And depending on the agency's rules, the agency will inspect the unit at regular intervals, and the agency will also redetermine the participant's portion of rent at regular intervals. Normally, that HQS inspection occurs annually. However, there are some agencies that will complete an HQS inspection biannually. In general, the agency will redetermine the participant's eligibility to calculate their portion of rent on an annual basis as well. So the nitty gritty, like the big questions that everyone wants to know is how much rent can a landlord charge? And how is the unit determined affordable for the family? And what is considered affordable? So this question, how much rent can a landlord charge? It's usually often confused. The landlord should propose the rent to the unit to the participant as they would if the participant were not receiving a Section 8 housing choice voucher rental assistance. So where affordability comes into play is the voucher, in addition to the household income, will determine how much rent a family can afford. So just as you and I have a budget and we know how much house we can afford depending on our income, our families are also issued a budget where the housing commission or the agency will determine how much rent the family can afford.
We had a question in the chat. Someone is asking what the HAP contract is.
The HAP contract is a housing assistance payment contract that is signed, and it is between the agency and the landlord. The tenant does not sign the HAP contract. The HAP contract will identify the unit that is under contract. It will also identify how much rent the landlord is charging. It will identify the program participant as well as the other household members. In addition, it will identify the utilities the tenant and the landlord is responsible. So some of the benefits of becoming a housing choice voucher landlord is the timely and dependable payments from the agency. Landlords will also receive regular inspections, which can be extremely helpful because we know that there are some owners that that inspect their units very infrequently, and the HQS inspection can be extremely helpful to identify any needed repairs or damage to the unit before those repairs or damages can get expensive. A tenant or a landlord can request an inspection of a unit at any time, but the agency is required to inspect the unit at regular intervals. One other thing that's really important about the inspection is that all agencies are required to identify a responsible party for deficiencies or repairs. A lot of agencies will identify the owner as being the responsible person to repair a deficiency or an item. I'll give you an example. If a family has a hole in the wall, a hole in the wall from there, the hole requires a drywall repair, and that hole it was placed in the wall because there wasn't a doorstop behind the door, so the doorknob created a hole in the wall. For example, the Ann Arbor Housing Commission would identify the landlord as the responsible party to make that repair. And the reason why we do that is because two reasons. Number one is we want to make sure that the repairs to the unit are being repaired at a sufficient level that is approved by the landlord. And because the Housing Commission does not have any responsibility or authority to actually make that repair, we want to make sure that that repair, as I mentioned, is adequate to the landlord's liking. Now, because the landlord we are identifying the landlord as responsible to make the repair. That does not mean that the landlord cannot charge the family to repair that particular item. Landlords are absolutely able and approved to charge families for damage to the unit that is beyond normal wear and tear.
We have a few questions in the chat.
Yes.
Okay, so the first one is, how does MSHDA determine who gets pulled off the wait list? I'm not sure.
I cannot speak specifically for MSHDA. However, there are rules that every agency has to follow in determining how they will manage a waiting list. I can assure you that if you were to go to MSHDA's website, then you would be able to review their Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan. If I'm not mistaken, MSHDA does have a preference for homeless individuals. Other than that, usually the way a person is pulled off of the waiting list is by having a higher number of preferences. And those preferences are identified by the agency in addition to the date and time of their application.
Thank you. That is also how I understand it. Another question is, how come there is no list provided for the participant to find a landlord that accepts HCV? I'm having a hard time finding my clients' rentals, and they have had to ask for multiple extensions.
So there is a list. However, most agencies do not have the ability to manage a comprehensive list. So for one, landlords have to identify that they are willing to accept a Section 8 voucher. Secondly, there has to be a platform that's available for landlords to list their units. I am familiar with a couple of different websites where landlords can list their units. However, oftentimes these websites require a membership or some sort of payment from the landlord. And if the landlord is unwilling to pay to use that platform, then it could be quite difficult for the landlord to advertise that unit. A couple of websites that I am familiar with is MichiganHousingLocator.com. Another website is AffordableHousing.com. Those are two platforms where landlords can list their units and identify that they are willing to accept a Section 8 grant.
Thank you. We have one more question, and I will add that also requires the landlord to go on the website and list their property, right? So they might not be willing to do that. Someone is asking, can you talk about what happens when a tenant has no income but is responsible for utilities? How does that work?
When a tenant has no income but are responsible for utilities, usually what happens is the tenant will receive a utility reimbursement payment from the agency. Now, what happens with the utility reimbursement payment is a couple of different things. So first of all, that is determined by the utility allowance. So every agency is required to have a policy that explains how they will calculate their utility allowance and how they will apply that utility allowance to each participating state. The math on a utility reimbursement is going to differ from agency to agency. There's a few factors that are involved. So number one, the agency will have a subsidy standard that it will issue to all households according to their family size. The payment standard is essentially the amount of financial assistance the agency will give to the family to assist them with their rent and their utilities. So that subsidy standard is going to be combined, the rent as well as the average cost of utilities. So the agency themselves are not going to know exactly how much the utilities cost for that particular unit. So they will determine an average utility cost. And that average is based on the bedroom size of the unit, the types of utilities or appliances that are in the unit and the family is responsible for, as well as the average cost of those particular utility types. In the event that the payment standard, it will exceed the gross rent, and the gross rent is determined by the actual rent charged by the landlord, plus the average cost of utilities, and subtracted from that will be a minimum rent that the agency will charge. That will determine how much of a utility reimbursement the family will receive. Now, that utility reimbursement, it could be anywhere from $2 to the $335, for example. It really all depends on the type of unit that it is, the average cost of utilities for that unit type, and the amount of rent that a landlord is charging in addition to it compared to the subsidy standard identified by the agency. So if a family is eligible for a utility reimbursement payment, that payment will be made directly to the family. It cannot be made to the landlord. It can be made to the utility company. However, that could be a little bit difficult for the agency to manage. So most agencies will issue the utility reimbursement check directly to the family.
Thank you. We have some more questions. We have, with the rent hikes, what is the plan to increase the vouchers to catch up with the rent inflation so HCV can move to higher opportunity areas? Not sure if you can answer that because you don't make those decisions, but if you have any information on that.
So again, that's another item that's going to be determined by each individual agency. However, each agency is charged with the responsibility of completing an analysis of their payment standard, the amount of subsidy that they are going to give to their families. So what happens is, and I'm going to give you a really broad overview of what that looks like. Oftentimes, HUD does not give agencies more money simply because the cost of rent has increased in a community. The agency is usually responsible to make that determination whether or not they're going to increase, how much they're going to increase their payment standard or decrease it for that matter, comparable to the market. And when they make that determination, one of the factors that they determine is they look to make sure that, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say make sure. They look at how many people that they currently have on their program. They look at how much subsidy they're already providing to those families that are on the program. And they also look at how much income the family themselves have in determining what that subsidy looks like. In addition to that, they also look at how many people in the community still need assistance. So, for example, if the agency maintains a waiting list, how long is that waiting list? How many people are on the waiting list? How many people are calling every day to be added to the waiting list? How long has the waiting list been closed? And the reason why we look at these things to make a determination how much subsidy that we'll provide to our families is because, as I mentioned, HUD generally does not give agencies more money simply because the rent has increased. We usually have to decide whether we are going to assist the families that we have and give them more money or maintain the level of funding that we are issuing our families and leave room to pull people off of the waiting list. So a lot of people do not understand why agencies are not able to pull off of their waiting list more frequently, or why the waiting lists are so long, or why there's so many people on the waiting list. And the reason being is because agencies, if they have a budget of $1 million, they only have a budget of $1 million. So as rents increase, if families are not able to absorb the cost of those rent increases, the agency is then charged with the responsibility of absorbing those rent increases. And when the agency absorbs those rent increases, that leaves less money available to assist new families. So specifically, the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, we have not increased our amount of subsidy per se. However, because HUD does an annual review of the average rent cost in a community on an annual basis, when we are completing our analysis, we have to use the HUD's average rent calculation, which is called the fair market rent. And with that fair market rent, the agency that administers the Housing Choice House program, they have the right to decide whether their subsidy amount is going to be between 90% and 110% of the fair market rent. Recently, HUD had approved a waiver for agencies to calculate their payment standard up to 120% of area fair market rent. So the Ann Arbor Housing Commission last year and for our upcoming fiscal year, we have decided to determine our payment standard at 120% of the fair market rent. But that is very specific to our agency. Again, every agency is charged with the responsibility to determine whether they will be between 90% and 110%. Otherwise, they must apply for the HUD waiver to go up to 120% of the fair market rate.
Okay, we have lots of questions, so I'll just keep going till they're gone or till it's too close to our time. What would the process be if a local agency that administered HCVs is not doing thorough inspection? So I'm assuming they're speaking to the HQS. So I'm not sure what a thorough inspection would be because, like there's only certain things asked for on the HQS, but.
Yes. So the HQS inspection is a standard and it is not written in such a way to be subjective. The inspector is supposed to follow the standards as indicated in the HQS form. There's two forms for the HQS inspection. There's a 7-page form that literally only captures the inspection results. And then there's a 12-page form that includes the inspection results as well as an explanation of the standard for each particular item. So I would say that if you are experiencing inadequate HQS inspections, you want to make sure that you're doing a couple of things. Number one, obtaining a copy of the inspection results, which you are, entitled to. You absolutely have the right to an HQS, the results of an HQS inspection. Secondly, be sure that you have a thorough understanding of the actual standards. As I mentioned, all agencies are required to use the HUD HQS inspection form. And then lastly, if you do see inadequacies or discrepancies in the application of the HQS standard, contact your agency, the program manager, and have a conversation. If you feel like you're not getting any direction from that manager, there's usually a liaison that you can speak with. Very specifically, please understand that MISTA is a public housing authority. They are an agency. However, MISTA hires independent contractors to assist them with administering their program. So, for example, if you have a tenant that has a MISTA voucher, you may be conducting business with a third party. However, if you are not getting effective communication from that third party, you can contact MISTA, who is the liaison of that third party, to have a more in-depth conversation about the experiences you're having with their HQS inspection.
Okay, we have a question. Is shared living available for this program? Example, the home is a 4-bedroom. Would the 4 individuals be able to qualify? The individuals are not related.
The shared housing is available, is a housing type that is eligible under the Housing Choice Voucher Program. All 4 individuals being eligible is much more subjective to the individuals and the agency. I can't, just say yes, absolutely, they're eligible. They have to meet the eligibility requirements, but you want to specifically have that conversation with the agency that administers the program in that area, because shared housing is a special program, a special housing type. There may be additional policies and procedures that are very different amongst each agency.
We have can a Section 8 landlord, so I'm HCV, require certain income requirements, such as 3 times the rent?
That is a very tricky question. What I would say is a landlord, not a Section 8 landlord, a landlord should establish screening criteria that they apply to all of their applicants, regardless of Section 8 assistant or non-Section 8 assistant. If you have different regulations or different procedures for someone that has a voucher versus someone that does not have a voucher, that there could be elements of fair housing discrimination there. In addition to that, you also want to be very aware of local ordinances, because there are some incomes that are that there are some subsidies that are counted as income. And if the landlord is not aware of that, you could be screening people out unintentionally, not realizing that, for example, in the city of Ann Arbor, the voucher is considered to be income.
Are you still talking, Wanisha? If you are, we can't hear you, or were you done?
No, I'm
okay.
done.
Thank you. So also, if you're interested in that income discrimination, Micah has a group working on that to get some legislation passed. So you can contact Lisa Chapman. I'll put her information in the chat, and you can work on, advocating for that. Okay, we have, why don't housing voucher programs provide clients with security deposit knowing that they have limited income? So again, you don't write the policy, but do you have anything you can share on that?
Well, the voucher program is supposed to assist with the monthly rent. It's not a program that assists with security deposits. There are programs out there that assist with security deposit. In addition to that, contact your local agency to see if they're partnering with any agencies to provide that may assist with security deposit. But also, in addition to that, um, there is a level of responsibility that the tenant is expected to have. That's number one. Secondly, we also want to keep in mind that normally security deposits are returned to the tenant. So, in the event that a tenant moves out of one unit, the idea is that they will be receiving a security deposit back from the unit that they previously leased. So, the expectation that a a tenant doesn't have security deposit or needs security deposit assistance is not universal. It's really on a case by case basis.
Thank you. A question from someone's client. If heat is included and tenant pays water, who gets the home heating credit? Do you know that answer?
What I will say, and if I could be wrong, don't quote me because this is not my profession. However, I do believe that when the family files their income taxes at the end of the year, regardless of whether it's only for the home heating credit, because a portion of their rent is is a contributor to the home heating credit, I do believe that the tenant themselves still receives the home heating credit.
And home heating credits are also dependent on income level. So depending on the landlord's income anyway, I don't know that they would qualify for it.
That's correct.
We have a question. Are HQS trainings still available or a refresher? As far as I know, there's HQS trainings happening a few times a year. I don't know if you have anything extra to add to that.
HQS inspections are usually held by a third-party contractor. I'm not even sure if MISHDA still does HQS inspections anymore, but it is something that can be Googled. There are a few agencies out there that offer HQS trainings periodically throughout the year, and I think there's a sufficient amount of companies. I don't want to say agencies. I mean companies.
Yeah, they're definitely companies.
Yeah. So I think that there's a fair amount of companies out there that offer HQS inspections that you can probably get register for one every couple of months.
Yep. And if you're willing to go out of state, they have them a lot.
Yeah.
Do you apply for an HCV in the county you live in or the county you want to find housing in?
You apply for HCV in the county that you want to receive housing in.
How do I know how many vouchers are available in my area? I have seen the lottery voucher and HARA voucher for the homeless. It appears that the county offers a voucher too. Is this one waiting list or are there separate lists?
Every agency is going to have their own waiting list. And sometimes the voucher is not available to any individual on the waiting list. There are a lot of different types of vouchers, and the eligibility criteria is going to be different for each voucher program. In addition to that, the waiting list process can and quite possibly will be different according to each voucher program. I wish that there was a way to provide a very easy explanation for that, or to give you some sort of resource to say, yes, there's only one location for you to inquire or apply, but unfortunately it's not. In addition to that, a lot of times when an agency is administered, and this is what HUD calls a special purpose voucher. So a lot of times when HUD administers a special purpose voucher type, there's usually two things that happen. Either, number one, there's already a sufficient amount of people on the agency's waiting list that already qualifies for that special purpose voucher. Or number two, HUD will require the agency to partner with with another nonprofit agency that provides a very particular service or services a very particular population to offer those housing vouchers to. It's very rare that an agency receives an influx of vouchers at an adequate level that will assist a population of people. There's usually just not enough assistance provided to the agency to help the number of people that.
And I will say, because there's a homeless preference waiting list right now, that means everyone that has homeless status gets pulled first. And then if that runs out, then they'll pull, people who are housed. So that I have found is also where there's like a disconnect for the waiting lists for folks. Let's see what else we have. Nope, someone's just offering information in the chat. They were asking, is there a way that a caseworker can get a copy of the HQS report? Where would they get that report?
They would have to contact the clients, the tenant's particular caseworker.
Okay, and do you know of a place where they could get a copy of like a blank HQS form just so they know what's being looked at during the inspection?
Yes, you literally can Google the three acronyms: HUD, HUD, Housing Choice Voucher, HCV, Housing Quality Standards Inspection, HQS. So HUD, HCV, HQS in the form will pop up.
Awesome. Okay, that's for questions for now if you want to continue on with your presentation.
All right. So this slide has been up long enough that I think everybody has taken a look at it. So as I mentioned, some of the benefits of being an HCV landlord is dependable rent payments, regular inspections, annual rent increases. HCV participants typically stay in the unit for an extended period of time. And there is no special regulation that says that an HCV participant is not subject to the terms of the lease. The program is governed by program rules as well as local ordinances, state laws, and federal laws. So these are the basic laws and rules of the HCV program. So obviously, first and foremost is the actual lease or rental agreement. And then you have the housing assistance payment contract. You also have the housing quality standards inspection. In addition to that, you have the lead-based paint rules. You have fair housing. You have the Violence Against Women's Act, and then you have any local ordinances in addition to state laws. So all of these things are going to be applicable to the Housing Choice Voucher program. And I'll just give you an example of what this looks like in a typical day. So you have your tenant or your Housing Choice Voucher participant. and they're going to sign a contract with a landlord, which is the actual lease or the rental agreement. That rental agreement is going to include language that is standard landlord tenant law language, and it does not violate any state or local ordinances. For example, you are not going to have a tenant sign a lease that very explicitly says there are no women and children allowed in the unit, because we know that that is a violation of state law and fair housing. So your lease is going to be subjected to, local and state laws. Then you have the housing association contract. That contract is between the agency and the landlord. The tenant is not a part of the housing assistance payment. Now, the contract between the agency and the landlord, basically, this is all of the program rules or reminders of the program. There are some rules that are very obvious to the program, but need to be stated in writing or stated out loud. But then there are some additional rules that are very specific to the program. For example, in the contract, it very clearly says that if the housing commission, if the agency owes the landlord money on behalf of the tenant, the landlord cannot attempt to collect that money from the tenant. The landlord can only collect that money from the housing authority or the agency. So there are some very specific program rules, but for the most part, the contract is going to state some of the obvious things that the owner can and cannot do, but it also mentions the responsibility of the housing authority, and it also mentions the responsibility of the tenant. And one of the main responsibilities of the tenant is that the tenant has to comply with the terms of the lease. We talked about the H2S inspection and lead-based paint. All of you all are aware that you must notify a family if a home has lead-based paint, or especially if it was built before 1970. The obvious fair housing law, but then you also have the Violence Against Women's Act, which can be quite confusing to not just program participants, but landlords as well. And I would encourage anyone to, Google VAWA or Violence Against Women, especially if you're a landlord. The Violence Against Women Act, this is not specific to the Housing Choice Voucher program. This is a federal law in regards to domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking. So I would encourage all renters and landlords to read the Violence Against Women to understand their rights.
Last month was Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we did a webinar on VAWA, so you should be able to view that on our YouTube page if you're interested.
Great. So as you know, the Housing Choice Voucher program is a income-based program, and the income is determined by all household members. So all agencies have a must follow HUD regulation to determine a policy in regards to how they will administer their program as the family's composition and circumstances change. So one of the things that we suggest that landlords do is to make sure that you're identifying all of the members in the household on the lease. That adds a level of protection for the landlord, as well as clarity for the landlord and the housing commission. Because we want to make sure that the program, that the household members that have been identified for the program are the same household members that have been identified as living unit. Families are required to report their changes in the family's income. Oftentimes, landlords have very close relationships with their tenants, and they know when there are changes in the household income. Although the landlord is not required to give that information to the agency, it is extremely helpful when the landlord provides the agency with that information so we can make sure that we are adequately administering our programs according to the program rules. In addition to that, changes in utility responsibility and changes in rent. All of those types of information, all of those types of things should be reported to the Housing Commission to make sure that we are calculating tenant portion of rent as well as the agency's portion of rent correctly. In the event that the utility responsibility changes in the household, which is not uncommon, sometimes landlords decide to include the utilities in the rent. Therefore, that's a change in the utility responsibility. Or they previously was paying for the utility, and now they want the resident to actually pay for the utility. That needs to be brought to the attention of the agency because it does change the terms of the contract. And failure to inform the agency of such change could be a violation of the contract. Obviously, changes in rent that should be reported to the agency. Should be reported to the agency at least 60 days before the increase is effective, and it really should be the agency should be informed of that rent increase prior to the tenant signing a lease renewal or a lease amendment, because the agency can calculate, although most rent increases are approved, the agency could make a determination that that rent increase is not affordable for the family. And sometimes having that information beforehand, the family could decide to relocate to a unit that's more affordable for them. Are there any questions?
Nope, not right now. I do want to let you know we have a half hour left for the presentation.
Okay. So there are a few forms that are required by each agency that the landlord will have to complete. The voucher is not a form that the landlord has to complete, but the voucher is a document that the agency will give to the family. And that voucher basically tells them that not only are you on the Housing Choice Voucher program, but it also identifies what agency the customer is a part of. And it also identifies who the caseworker is for that. Families are only issued a voucher when they're searching for a unit. At the time that they actually lease a unit, they're officially on the voucher program, but they don't have the voucher in their hand. The next document is called for a request for tenancy approval. You'll have a lot of agencies that will reference this document as the RTA or the RAFTA. This document will describe all of the demographics of the unit that the agency needs to determine whether or not the unit is affordable for the family and to complete a rent analysis to assure that the rent the owner is asking for is comparable to similar units in the community. This form is required by every agency to be completed by each landlord. This is a description of how the agency will determine whether or not the unit is affordable for the family. And in addition, some information that will determine whether or not the rent the owner is asking for is comparable. So in this calculation, the family share exceeds 40% of the family's monthly adjusted income. And as a result of that, because the family is looking to lease this unit, which we call the initial lease term, the agency would not be able to afford to approve this unit because it is unaffordable for the family. Now, does this mean that the rent that the owner is asking for is not comparable? No, it does not. This simply means that this unit at this rental price with this average cost of utilities is not affordable for the family. So earlier in the presentation, I explained to you that owners should absolutely charge the same amount of rent for their rental units for voucher families that they do for non-voucher families. With that in mind, not all rent is going to be affordable for all families. A family that does not have any income will be shopping for a unit based off of the agency's payment standard. A family that does have a source of income, a portion of their income, in addition to the agency's payment standard, is going to determine the family's affordability. So essentially, the more income you have in the household, the more options you're going to have in your housing opportunities. So success in the program really is based on communication. Anything that you don't understand, anything that you need clarification for, make sure that you are communicating with the agency, very specifically the caseworker. It pays to attend these types of seminars, webinars, training activities, because you learn more and more about the program. As I mentioned before, all agencies that administer the House Choice Voucher program have a set of regulations that they must follow. However, we have the ability of setting different policies and procedures on administering those rules. So one of the things that I would suggest that a landlord does for a program participant is to make a file for that resident. That file should include the family's voucher, the HAP contract, the tenant's lease. Some other information that can be included in the family's file is the inspection. Any lease addendums that you or the Housing Commission or agency provides on behalf of the family, in addition to the ledger or any other communication. Having an adequate file on your program participants, it just helps with the managing and the organization of it all. You'll know exactly what agency is administering the voucher assistance for that particular client, and that becomes extremely useful when you have multiple units and you're dealing with multiple agencies. And in terms of when do you notify or when do you reach out to the housing authority or the agency? Whenever you have questions, but honestly, definitely when you have any concerns or there's issues. When we are communicating effectively with our landlords and our program participants, we can prevent evictions. We can prevent instances where the unit has excessive damages, any other lease violations, or just miscommunication altogether, right? Some of the topics are listed here. These are the most frequent topics that become a issue when administering the voucher program and working with landlords and families is landlords are not providing adequate notice to the agency of rent increases. They're not giving the agency a copy of lease renewals. Again, this is information that the agency needs to know because the agency will redetermine the amount of assistance that the family qualifies for. HQS deficiency and repair items. If the unit is inspected and it fails and there are some repairs that need to be made, the landlord and the tenant both can request an extension to have those items repaired, and that will avoid having the rent abated. We don't want to abate the rent, the housing assistance payment for the landlords, because once that rent is abated, the landlord cannot ask to receive that money back. The agency cannot retroactively pay for any days the unit was in abatement. And damage to the unit. Again, unit damages beyond wear and tear can be charged to the family. The agency may have partners that could assist with any extensive damage costs, but we want to try to prevent excessive damages to the unit, excessive costs. And you as a landlord definitely want to notify the agency if there's any damage to the unit after the family has moved out. But you want to make sure that you're complying with state and local law when you are applying damage charges and retaining security deposits. Definitely notify the agency for non-payment of rent. You don't have to wait until you file for an eviction because you want it to be more effective. Maybe notifying the agency that a tenant has not paid rent can actually prevent an eviction. You definitely want to give the agency copies of notice quid or request for possession of the unit or any eviction. And if you are aware of any changes in the household composition, you want to make sure that you notify the agency just to make sure that everyone is completely aware who is being assisted, because families are not allowed to sublet apartments. And a lot of times, if that happens, the agency is not aware. And if the agency is not aware that the family no longer lives in the unit and the agency continues to pay housing assistance payment to the landlord, the agency can hold both the owner and the tenant responsible for those funds. So the basics of what you need to know, security deposits and application fees, those are the responsibility of the tenant. However, the agency may have some resources or partnerships that could assist with security deposits and application fees. The same for damage to the unit. Ultimately, the tenant is responsible, but the agency may have some resources available. And then your local ordinances. Specifically, the city of Ypsilanti and the city of Ann Arbor have recently rewrote some of their ordinances to assist families, to assist tenants that may have criminal backgrounds or arrest records, in addition to families that have housing choice vouchers.
So we have a question come up. I'm not sure. It's about the lists and how they're managed. Wondering about a program availability for individuals with an illness who are on the cuff of being homeless. but due to their illness cannot go to a shelter. To my understanding, the individual had an HCV before and was evicted. Not sure what to do to help. Any suggestions? I've called several organizations to no avail, nothing. So I'm guessing the questions in here are about what happens when you've been evicted with an HCV, if you can get another one, and then also if there's, special prioritization for people who are precariously housed.
So yes, and yes. Just because a HCV participant has been evicted from a home does not mean that they're not eligible to receive assistance again in the future or the near future. They are going to be subject to the waiting list, and that's according to the agency or the jurisdiction that they're in. There are a lot of agencies that may have preferences for disabled individuals and or homeless individuals where they will give those folks priority over someone who does not meet that criteria. A lot of communities have continuum of care networks where a homeless individual can contact that continuum of care. It's called a CLC, and inquire about housing opportunities that are available. And again, the housing opportunities that are available are going to differ from community to community. If you are in Washtenaw, the person asking the question, if you are in Washtenaw County, you can feel free to go to our website or call us, and we will direct you the best that we can. However, I do want to mention that in the climate that we are in right now, there are a lot of agencies that have been struggling with staffing. And that staffing has put a severe hold on administering programs, or slow down the process to administer programs because the agency they just don't have enough staff to administer the programs that they have adequately. So there has been a tremendous struggle since COVID with agencies being able to keep up with the demand. So again, I would say that if you are local, feel free to contact us and we will try to refer you the best that we can. Otherwise, I would encourage you to reach out to your local continuum of care, which is usually an umbrella of support service agencies that can help with, or at least inform you of any housing availability.
We had another question come in. Please clarify. In an earlier comment, I heard you say that HCV cannot be counted as tenant income to make a prospective tenant income eligible by a landlord because this could be interpreted as a form of discrimination against folks who do not have an HCV. Is that a correct understanding of what was said? And if so, would that apply to all MSHDA funding and agencies?
No, that's not correct. So it is, if a landlord is going to establish an income requirement, they need to establish an income requirement that all of their potential applicants, potential tenants are subjected to. You cannot have a different eligibility criteria for housing choice voucher families than you do for non-housing choice voucher. That is a violation of housing. In addition to that, the city of Ann Arbor has written a local ordinance that the housing choice voucher is considered a source of income. That may not be applicable to other communities. I encourage you to make sure you are aware of your local ordinances before administering such screening criteria to make sure that you're not in violation of fair housing or any local ordinances. I want to make sure that I answered that the viewer's question correctly.